right, everybody. How are you doing tonight? Yeah, so Justin is out of town. I have got some stall content for you lined up. Thanks to Code Red for hard carrying the stream dance party in chat. Yeah. So I was trying to figure out. I didn't really feel like playing games on TCO. I didn't want to like bring back like the viewer challenges, and I didn't really want to play like Dark Tidings versus Dark Tidings on TCO. So I still wanted to make sure that I kept the content related to Keyforge. So I figured doing a review on the set after about 200 games of Dark Tidings on stream would maybe be helpful for people. So let me know if the card sizes are too big or too small. Oh yeah, we could talk expanse too. We can do that as well. If the card sizes are about right, I can scale it up or scale it down. I tried to make it so that it's large enough that you can read the card's text. So I didn't want to just give Keyforge cards a rating on a scale of like 1 to 5, because I think that Keyforge is too complex of a game for cards to neatly fit into a rating. So I have decided on the rating system, which I've put next to my portrait, so that way you can keep it in mind as I go through. And I'll explain the rating system now before we dive into it. So the first rating there is niche. And a niche card is a card that is unlikely to be useful in any given deck or any given game without a very specific set of circumstances to occur. The card that I had in mind for niche was going, I think a good example is something like Old Egad. And I'll explain more about Old Egad when I get to it. But so something like Old Egad is a very niche card, right? And then the next rating is situational. The idea behind the situational rating is that there are a few times per game that this card can be good. And that to get like maximum power from a card, the opportunity really has to present itself in a game. A lot of times the opportunity will present itself, but it's not guaranteed. Yeah, and I'll have to point them out as I go through too. That's my intention. I'd like to see after 100 decks, I guess 101, if you count the deck that Justin purchased. We played through 101 decks, so it would kind of be like Mass Mutations, where it's like we didn't get to play with the Sins. How many other cards in Mass Mutations that we didn't get to play with, right? Yeah, exactly. I talked about that on Call of Discovery too, where a lot of the evil twins. I mean, because there's evil twins at all rarities. I don't think we played with every single evil twin. As a matter of fact, I'm like 99% sure we didn't. All right. Anyway, sorry. Back to the card rating system. Let me get through that, and then I'll get back into the pre-set review banter. All right. So then. Role player is going to be an average card. And the idea behind a role player is it's got a very specific job in a game, and you're going to play that card typically proactively. A situational card is often going to be reactive in nature, whereas a role player is going to be a card that you're trying to do something proactive with. And I think a lot of creatures are going to fit into the role player category. Skavizi. You're digging it. Well, thanks. 6 months of support there. A lot of support. Appreciate that. So yeah, a role player is going to be. I suspect a decent number of cards are going to fall into the role player category. Just just due to the nature of Keyforge. But yeah, so the role player is kind of a catch-all category. I was trying to think of like where the vast majority of creatures would fit in. So role player was like a good I think catch-all phrase for that. And then finally you've got Standout. And a Standout card is a card that is useful every time you play it. Sometimes it'll define the deck. Standout cards are exactly that. They're cards you have to play around. A card like, say, Comm Officer Kirby or Infernus, I would put into the Standout category. Cards that warp the game around them. Perhaps maybe they're too powerful. But I didn't create them. We just got to play with them, right? So that is what I would call a Standout. Now, very rarely, Standouts don't do anything for you. Thinking of like Comm Officer Kirby when you have like a hand of 6 Star Alliance, right? You're not going to rag on Kirby for that. To compare your ratings to mine. Okay, yeah, it'll be... I just kind of came up with this rating system on the fly. I put some thought into it last night. And there are some ratings, an early one here. Don't have the categories. Yeah, I don't necessarily like numerical categories for Keyforge cards. I know that's what SAS is trying to do, is to try to like give you more than just the sum of its parts, right? And that's what the synergy part of the synergy anti-synergy score is. And if we're looking at a set, so one thing couple of other philosophies right off the bat. Justin and I primarily try to keep our content focused on gameplay. The reason for that being that, especially streaming, it gives you a unique opportunity to really like showcase the game. You get to discuss plays, and I think that is very valuable. And there is a space for theory crafting in the community as well, but Justin and I typically save that or let other people tackle that stuff, right? So Justin and I really try to focus on the actual gameplay itself. And when you're looking at a set of Keyforge cards, it's really difficult to get that. When we were just looking at Dark Tidings before the set came out, it's very difficult to get an idea of how the set plays out. So I feel like at this point, now that we've played so many games, the set review is a little bit more meaningful, because I can tell you, this is a card I'm looking for. This is a card that I think is good. This card was better in other sets. It's not as good in this set. That kind of thing. Yeah, that's just kind of some of the philosophy behind why I'm doing that now. It doesn't hurt that Justin's somewhere in the contiguous United States, and I don't know where right now. Whereabouts unknown. So we couldn't play games, but I think this makes for some pretty good content anyway. And I also want to give another caveat that do you think our ratings would be synergist? I think Justin and I would probably end up in relatively the same boat. We would come to an agreement on something. One of us might have like a slightly different rating than the other, but I think we would, there'd be enough of an argument to get us where, we'd basically be in agreement. But I definitely think we would probably diverge on a couple of places. So, yeah. All right. So enough of that. Getting into the actual set review itself. So my goal is to do at least the first 3 houses tonight. It depends on really how long it takes. I've talked for 10 minutes now. We haven't even gotten into a single card yet. So we'll just see how long this takes. And I will, adapt for tomorrow. It may get to a point where I just have to like speed run a lot of cards. So if I take like big jumps and I want to find like a card that I really want to spend more time on, then I might do that. There's, I don't know how many cards are in the set, 400 something maybe. Yeah. So without further ado, we'll jump in. Going alphabetically by house, I'm using Arcana here. Wonderful Keyforge community tool. If nobody else is, if somehow you're in the stream and not aware of it, right? Disregard it. So that's the thing, is commons are the most important thing. Sorry. This is specifically in the Dark Tidings versus Dark Tidings 2. So I don't have much Archon experience with this set. But I have a feeling, based off of just like the various power levels of decks that we've played, that Dark Tidings is probably going to struggle in Archon environments in general, because it feels like a lot of the decks that we play are not nearly as powerful as stuff we have played in the past. Keep these ratings in mind for Dark Tidings versus Dark Tidings. This is probably more useful for sealed than it is for constructed. So yes, I'll rate it in the context of Dark Tidings. An early one, it's both of these, Academy Training and Nominal Exploiter, are both from previous sets. I think Academy Training, and I'll just dive in right here. We'll start with Academy Training here. Academy Training, I'm going to put it in the role player rating. The reason is that you can always, as long as you untap with a creature, you could always use this. It's just you get to draw a card, you get to use a creature. It does lock the creature into House Logos, which can be a problem, but there's a lot of like a lot of house manipulation stuff in Star Alliance that making a creature belong to Logos can benefit you, through Diplomatic Gung, Zap, various other things. And the ability to just have a creature be ready, if it's ready, you play it on a creature and reap and draw a card. It's just very good. It doesn't have an amber pip on it, but it might as well say gain an amber the turn you play it. I think this card is just fine. It is rare, so you're not going to see it that often, and it doesn't define a deck, but it's always welcome. I do think you might be able to have too many of these, and this is honestly better on creatures that are low priority targets, from my experience. Creatures that your opponent were not likely to remove in the first place. It's better on them. You can put it on a creature that has a reap ability and double up and get some very powerful stuff, but your opponent's going to make it a priority to get rid of it. Typically, if it's got an Academy Training on it, your opponent's going to try to kill it anyway. So I like Academy Training. I think it's about the same power level as it was in previous sets. Maybe it might be better in Dark Tidings, honestly, because it gives you a way to use your creatures out of house. It's definitely welcome in the set. Now, Nominal Exploiter, I think, is actually slightly worse in this set than it had been in previous sets, and that's because of the lack of damage pips overall. So there's less ways to get damage onto creatures that don't involve directly fighting, and then a lot of the removal in this set is pretty bad. Logos only has like a handful of ways to put damage on creatures through actions in this set. So Nominal Exploiter's value has gone down, in my opinion, in this set. I'm going to say actually put this at situational. A lot of times, it's in previous sets I would rate Nominal Exploiter much higher. In Worlds Collide, it's very valuable because there's a lot of ways to like shoot creatures. Yeah, multiple avenues to shoot creatures and then finish them off with a Nominal Exploiter. And there were just a lot of creatures that would hang around, a lot of really powerful creatures. So Nominal Exploiter is probably better against like Saurian in this set. Yeah, I'm gonna say it's definitely situational in Dark Tidings. Arkhan's Callback. So you might consider this controversial, but I think this is actually a situational card. Now remember that situational means there's only a couple times a game where this card is very good. If you have a 5-card Logos hand and this is in your hand, this card is not as good, right? If you play at that same time and you draw up. Now, If you've got 4 Logos creatures in an Arkhan's callback, and you think your opponent might not have great removal, you could play those 4 creatures, then hold the Arkhan's callback, right? And you're gambling that you're still going to have those creatures. So on your next turn, you could take a Logos turn and draw 5 cards, right? So, but Arkhan's callback is very good on the first turn of the game. Once again, that goes back to that situational thing. But you only get one first turn of the game, so Arkhan's callback is powerful in those situations, but otherwise, a lot of times it doesn't feel as good, which is why I think this card, despite having a crazy text on it, is actually fairly balanced, right? You would never, like having 2 of these in your hand wouldn't feel great, right? Because you couldn't play them both in the same turn. Now, you might end up in a situation where you play a bunch of Logo stuff, play one Arkhan's callback, draw the second one, and then go right back into a Logos turn. You'll have like half your deck in your hands at that point, but I think those decks are kind of few and far between. Armadrone, not quite a role player. I'm going to put him in the situational. He is not easy to take off the board. Yeah, so I think Arkhan's callback is a crazy good card. I think especially if you combine it with like a couple of the other Logo stuff. But like there are times that you can draw Arkhan's callback and it feels dead. And so like that's why the ratings aren't necessarily this card is good or this card is bad, because I think there are some very good cards that I'm going to rate as situational, that I wouldn't put in like a standout category, right? So Armadrone is definitely situational. There's not a lot of there's a decent amount of stuff in specific houses that Armadrone can fight. Armadrone in Dark Tidings doesn't really want to fight into Saurian and doesn't really want to fight into Sanctum, but against Shadows, Armadrone can get some work done. You can try to like steal your Amber back, and the 3 armor actually keeps Armadrone safe from a lot of the damage removal in this set. But the 1 power is actually a drawback because the Armadrone is not going to kill anything. Like whereas Bat Drone in Coda always felt like you had to kill this thing or it was going to take over a game. Well, not necessarily take over a game, but you just didn't want to keep Bat Drones around on the table. Armadrone, you don't really ever have like a good... It feels bad fighting to get rid of it. Armadrone is definitely one of those cards that is like kind of a thorn in your side, but it doesn't take a whole lot to kill it. You only need a 4 power creature to destroy it. So you're not never happy about it, but at the same time you don't want this dumb robot stealing from you. The Evil Twin Armadrone, I don't know that we actually opened one of these, but like the Steel 2 is very attractive, but I think the Armadrone is going to have trouble fighting against the same targets that the non-Evil Twin would have trouble with, right? Because it's got to live. So at 3 power, that means it has to fight 2 power or less creatures or elusive creatures, right? So the Steel 2 is very tempting, right? That's an insane value there. And you could probably get some more value from it from like Untamed, but same kind of thing. I think this is going to be a situational card. I might upgrade Armadrone normal to like a role player, because the times where it actually gets to do its thing in the game, it's going to I mean, it's a 4 amber swing, right? Steel 2 is just insane. So Seaborg is absolutely a role player, in my opinion. Seaborg is a card I'm relatively happy to see. If it, I want to typically untap with it. It actually has a reap effect. And reap effects are not as common in this set as I would hope without the tide. So the Seaborg at least involves raising the tide, which is good. It's like a way to do it. And anything that gives you extra removal in this set is welcome. So I'm usually pretty happy to see Seaborg in Logos. Even if it never gets to really do its thing, your opponent's got to expend resources to get to it. Backup plan is definitely a role player. I would almost put this in standout, but balance sheet rate. Well, we um backup plan, I'm gonna put in a role player. It's honestly sometimes situational, but I think if you've got backup plan in your deck, you can play for this, and it can actually archive a crazy amount of cards. I think anytime you archive any amount of cards in Dark Tidings, you're usually pretty happy about it. And backup plan is pretty good because it just being able to draw or to archive based off the number of creatures your opponent has is really good. It's a way to find answers, because a lot of times in Dark Tidings, if you're outnumbered, you don't have a lot of time to find an answer before the game is just done. And so backup plan is a pretty good way to try to go search for an answer. If you don't find your answer, you can usually leave the archives alone. You just leave them piled up and for a later date. So I like backup plan. Bilge Warden, I'm going to put at role player. Bilge Warden, from my experience, has actually been a discard sometimes. If you already have the Tide, without something to take advantage of giving your opponent the Tide for some reason, and taking it back, like a Hydra Cataloger or various other things, sometimes you've got control of the Tide and you don't have anything to do with this Bilge Warden, which is surprising and shocking. And Bilge Warden's body's not quite big enough to be relevant for combat. If Bilge Warden gets enraged, Bilge Warden is more or less as good as dead. But anything that can raise the Tide for you is a good effect in Dark Tidings. So ultimately, Bilge Warden, got to go with role player. And the ability to just take the Tide back if your opponent does take it. Like, having a Bilge Warden on the table and your opponent unable to answer it just kind of makes your opponent swear off paying change to get the Tide, right? Just being able to tap one of your creatures and take the Tide. Just being able to tap one of your creatures and take the Tide is an absolute beating. So, Binary Moray is, I want to call this a standout. I think role player is a good home for this. It's on the verge. Binary Moray is incredibly powerful. An interesting thing is that your opponent can just let you keep the Tide, though, and stop you from ever being able to take the Tide so that you can ready the Moray and use it twice in a turn. Bilge Warden and Moray are actually can work well together if you use them in the correct order to make sure that you don't tap your own Moray. But if you've got ways to like give your opponent the Tide and take it back, Binary Moray can go kind of crazy. So yeah, 5 power is nice in the set too. It's 5 power, I would say, is like a high watermark. It keeps you safe from crushing charge, and there's a lot of creatures and a lot of the houses that can't get up to 5 damage to fight Binary Moray effectively. Evil Twin, I think we had one deck that had it. I don't think it had advanced. The Moray is a role player. It's not quite standout. The Evil Twin Moray, I'm going to still put it role player, just because Skirmish is 5 power Skirmish in this set is pretty good. There's a lot of things that you would just rather not actually trade the damage with. And so and being able to get like a couple of fights in with Moray, or to be able to play the Moray, raise the Tide in the same turn and get an immediate fight with it, is valuable in this set. Any kind of instant creature interaction is going to be good. I would give the edge to the regular Binary Moray between the two, but I don't think you're disappointed with an Evil Twin Binary. Bouncing Death Quark is absolutely a role player in this set. I don't quite want to call it a standout, but it's arguably at its best in this set. that 2-bit always stands out. Yeah, my biggest issue with binary moray is since it's uncommon, it isn't necessarily the yeah, the evil twin one where he's got the two. Yeah, it's so funny. But binary bouncing Deathquark is very powerful in this set. There's a lot of junk creatures. Arguably, bouncing Deathquark is the best card to pair with Old Egad. Old Egad is pretty bad otherwise. But with bouncing Deathquark, he looks pretty good. Bouncing Deathquark is definitely better than Final Analysis, which I'll cover in a bit. But bouncing Deathquark, just being able to selectively remove creatures in this set is so powerful. That I'm actually, you know what? I've talked myself into it. Bouncing Deathquark is definitely a standout in this set. There's far fewer wards than a lot of other sets, so typically when you're killing a creature in this set, it sticks. So I think bouncing Deathquark is absolutely one of the best removals in this set. Brain Eater is a role player. He's not too bad in this set. There's actually a decent amount of elusive in a lot of the factions. His 6 power is pretty big. He is uncommon, so one of my biggest gripes with Logos is that the commons in Logos are actually pretty small. So unless you get like a nice uncommon suite of Logos, you don't really have like a lot of stuff that'll help you compete for the board. But Brain Eater's not bad at competing for the board. And the draw cards, typically pretty nice. Drawing cards in this set is a little bit more at a premium than it was, say, in Mass Mutations, with the lack of card draw enhancements overall. There's like a handful, right? I think just Infomorph and Mutagenesis Researcher. It's a little bit more difficult. Oh yeah. If you got a way to use Brain Eater to outside a house, that's where Brain Eater gets really good. The thing about Brain Eater and say like Coda, you had like Sergeant Zakiel, you had Gengar Chieftain, you had ways to utilize your Brain Eater outside your Logos turns to draw cards. And so like being able to draw cards during like say a Brobnar turn is really nice. That's not something you're typically accustomed to. So I like Brain Eater a lot. I don't think we have that many in this set. Just the nature of it being uncommon, so we probably only have a couple of decks that have them in it that has actually advanced. Now, moving on to Captain Cree Sage, I'm going to say he's very situational. I think the evil twin Captain Cree Sage is a role player, but regular Captain Cree Sage is very bad. If you notice at the Logos creatures that we've looked at so far, the only one that has had like any sort of text that was relevant was the skirmish on the evil twin binary moray. And guess what? Captain Cree Sage is an evil twin. So that means you can't ever have regular Captain Cree Sage and evil twin binary moray. So he can't get skirmish from like the some of the Logos creatures we've seen so far. There's not a whole lot of keywords in Logos that like Captain Cree Sage can actually get. So you need like keywords from the other houses. His 6 power body, he's just like a worse Brain Eater, right? Like sometimes he'll help with the board. And we had several Captain Cree Sages, and he's just been a big dude, and that's it. And that's not good enough in this set. This is arguably one of the worst set for large creatures because of Unfathomable. So like a 6 power body, a lot of times you can just kind of ignore it. So it really depends on what else is in the rest of your deck. That's why I'm going to put Cree Sage in the situational category. Captain Cree Sage Evil Twin is pretty good. Getting rid of your opponent's keywords is nice. You lose your keywords, but we went over it. The Logos creatures don't have a whole lot of keywords. So losing your keywords may not be that big of a deal. So I think those are the foxes. What are they called? The ones from Worlds Collide. The ones that ready. The wolves. Yeah, evil twin. I mean, like, and he gets rid of them too, right? So I feel like Captain Cree has like negative synergy all the way. Yeah, more wolves. There you go. And a Chronophage, I think, is a standout. I'm going to put Chronophage at standout. It's relatively easy to remove, but if played at the right time and protected, Chronophage, it can be an absolute crushing. It basically demands removal on the spot or you lose. A lot of the games that Justin and I have played, Chronophage has hit the board and died instantly. So we haven't really had a chance to necessarily see this card take over the game. Final analysis and Chronophage. Oh yeah, that's a good combo. Yeah, that's really good. The Chronophages are rare, right? So like the standout cards that I've talked about so far are higher in the rarities. Chronophage, that effect is insane, right? Artifacts and creatures have Omega. It feels like Dusk Witch, where it's like if I don't have an immediate answer, I'm going to lose the game. So yeah, I like Chronophage a lot. And this set struggles with removal, so Chronophage is a little bit safer than he would be in other sets, because typically 3 power just means instantly dead, but there's not like punch in this set, so it is rare. Yep. All right, Data Forge. In this set, situational. In other sets, Data Forge might get bumped up a grade or two, but this set, there is not nearly the archiving that existed before. So Data Forge is really hard to pull off in this set. You would need some sort of final analysis shenanigans, but if you final analysis with 15 creatures on the board or whatever, I'm assuming you were in a position where you were going to win the game regardless of the Data Forge or not. The Data Forge, I think, is slightly worse in this set than it has been previously. It's still always nice to have one. You're never mad about it, right? Because you'll just play it and get your amber and move on. Worst case. The Dr. Verroctor combo stuff, it all comes together. So I'm going to put it in the role player category, all combined. And I think it is better in some decks than others. So I don't want to give it a situational rating, and I don't want to give it a standout rating, because I think depending on your deck, it's going to feel either or, right? You've got triple PI Swevens with the Rooftop Laboratory. That's going to feel like a standout. If you have some barely functional Logos with too many old EGADs, not enough actual good cards, then this combo is going to feel very difficult to pull off. If your deck is like Saurian Sanctum in this stuff, thanks for checking in, Roadrunner. But if your deck has got like the wrong mix of stuff, then the combo is going to feel kind of slow and clunky. So I'm going to put it in the role player category. I'll cover each of the cards as we go through. So Verroctor himself, 2 power and elusive, means he's not easy to fight off the board. Your opponent's going to have to devote some extra stuff to it. And his ability is powerful. The ability to recur actions that you've played before can be really strong. It's it's just a lot of times creatures with reap abilities just don't get to use them in this set because of Unfathomable, and a couple other things. But his ability is quite good on its own. Eddie, I do think Eddie is much worse in this set than he was in Worlds Collide. Eddie actually goes into the role player category for this. In Worlds Collide, Eddie is a standout. In this set, Eddie is a role player. You have to time Eddie correctly in this set, and there's not nearly the recursion that existed in Worlds Collide. So you don't get to really bounce Eddies and replay them, or exhume them, or do the dumb stuff that you got to do with Eddies before. And the total amount of archiving is kind of gated behind different rarities. So you need like a very specific set of Logos cards for Eddie to get your archives to the point where you can like lock opponents out of keys. So I think Eddie is substantially worse in this set than he had been in other ones, which is a shame because Eddie in Worlds Collide is one of the most insane cards, right? You could almost say that Eddie is format warping, just due to his nature. But Eddie's really at his worst in this set. There's not really good ways to protect him, so that means he's a priority target, and your opponent never feels bad about killing him. So there's actually a decent number of ways to purge Eddie in this set too. So not only do you not have nearly as much recursion, in the rare instances where you might be able to Witch of the Dawn it will it can get purged, and your recursion is completely useless. Yeah, if we go back and we take a look at the stuff that's archived so far, Binary Moray is uncommon. Eddie is common, at least. But Binary Moray is uncommon. Eureka, the next card, situational again, very powerful card. Same reasons as Arkhan's Callback. There's a couple times a game where you can play this card and it's absolutely insane, but a lot of times, you can. I would probably give the edge to Eureka over Arkhan's Callback later in the game, because being able to gain 3 amber it off a single card is very good. But sometimes, since it's archiving 2 random cards, sometimes it'll clip the Logos cards that were in your hand that you wanted to play as well. So it can sometimes backfire. But gaining 3 amber cannot be understated. So Eureka is I think Eureka is more of a role player. Okay, I've talked myself into giving it a better grade than Arkhan's Callback. Eureka is a role player, and then there are situations where Eureka is absolutely crazy, right? So, but once again, it's an uncommon that does the archiving. Philo the Researcher is role player / situational. Philo the Researcher oftentimes just says draw a card on it. You can take advantage of like the Sanctum deployed creatures, I think, which is why I really want to give Philo a situational rating. The contents of your deck are going to determine if Philo is better or worse than other decks, or if you can actually draw cards off of it. Typically in Keyforge, players will overrate the ability to draw a single card. But drawing multiple cards is very powerful. Philo needs some crazy stuff to happen so that she'll actually draw you enough cards. Yeah, I'm always happy to see Eureka, Sad Cry Bear, to that point. Eureka I'm always happy to see it. But when you can play Eureka in a game is very you've got specific windows in which you can play Eureka, right? If you're ahead, it's easier to play Eureka. Or if you're the very first turn and you get one play, you can play Eureka. I like mulliganing for Eureka. However, if you're going second and you've got Eureka, and let's say you've got like 2 other Logos cards in your hand, you got to think long and hard before you play that Eureka. Because if you hit one of those Logos cards, which is likely, since you're pulling 2 random ones, right? You're generating 3 amber is good, but if you hit, say, and Eureka doesn't combo with Science in this set, right? Since it's alpha, you have to play it before you could play something like Science. So if you're counting actions in your deck and you're looking at, say, Science, you don't count Eureka because it can never be played before. Your Science can never be played before it, right? So it's Eureka is a good card, and that's why the rating system that I'm using isn't the sole definition of whether a card is good or bad. It's mostly of the ability for it to be played in a game and have it be maximum impact. That's more or less what the rating system's going for, if that makes sense. And like I said, this is like a rush job on a rating system. So I don't expect this to become like a standard or anything. It was just like a good thought exercise for this review. Now, Final Analysis is a role player. This card has hilariously backfired for Justin and I. There's a lot of times where using it to wipe the opponent's board when you don't have a board feels really bad, because oftentimes your opponent just repopulates the table with like the 8 cards that they just drew. So I think playing Final Analysis is better against worse decks. So decks that are like barely functional in the first place, if they somehow manage to get out enough creatures, then Final Analysis just kind of like breaks their back. But against like the better decks that were already efficient, letting them draw extra cards is usually a nightmare. So Final Analysis it's a very vital card, because a lot of times the opponent's board of 8 creatures is going to beat you. So it really just kind of depends on how good the opponent's deck is. And it does actually lead to some interesting decisions. Sometimes you're like, do I want to play these couple Logos creatures? If I've got some bad Logos creatures, I may as well run them out and draw some extra cards, maybe try to set up some other stuff. Yeah, I would, if I had a deck that had like 3 Final Analysis and sealed, I'm not sure that I would play that deck. Because I can just imagine you losing a game because you played Final Analysis and your opponent drew a bunch of cards, right? Forgive or Forget is a standout, in my opinion. It's only bad on the first... It's not even bad on the first turn, if I'm being honest. If you've got another action that you want to play with this card, this card is insane, in my opinion. It's modal. I have yet to use the Purge ability. The Purge ability is actually probably better in Arkhan than it is in Sealed, right? Being able to purge key combo pieces from your opponent is very good. But the archiving cards of 2 different types from your discard pile is so powerful, and it's a very enabling card. It's just really, really good, in my opinion. This is a card I cannot get enough of in this set. My favorite decks that we've played so far have had copies of this, or even multiple copies. And it gets insane if you've got multiple copies of it, right? Being able to like archive 2 actions and 2 creatures from one of your other houses to set up just a gigantic turn later on, very good. You can actually some of the like Static Charge is common, and it's an upgrade, and it's definitely removal in this set. Static Charge is a solid card. So you can like archive an action and Static Charge with this. So this works as like a nice little amber, like a future amber boost. So despite the fact that this card doesn't have amber on it, typically it's going to give you amber for the stuff that you're archiving again, and it's like letting you set up future answers. I think Forgive or Forget is easily one of the best new cards in the set. So it's just crazy. Groundbreaking Discovery. Talked about the whole combo already. This piece right here removes itself. Cannot be understated how powerful destroying a key and wiping the board is. It's difficult to pull off, but it will get you back into a game you had no business being in, right? There is no other effect in the game that is like this. Like I said, the whole combo is a role player. Groundbreaking Discovery is going to be situational by itself, but it's got a very powerful effect. Honors Keysis. I'm going to go ahead and say that this card is niche. I think your deck has to have very specific components for this card to be good. Now, in that niche, this card does straight up forge a key. So, the few decks that can take advantage of this card are going to absolutely love it, right? But it's going to require a heavy amount of archiving or recursion, like think twice, which I'll cover in a bit. But yeah, Honors Keysis is absolutely in a niche. Hyde and Vellum are both role players. I like Hyde and Vellum a lot. I think they're even better now than they were in whichever set they appeared initially. I think they were in Worlds Collide, unless I'm mistaken. They were just overshadowed by so much other stuff. And they were solid in Mass Mutations, but man, this set, it's very noticeable that the removal is a lot worse. Yeah, Worlds Collide, Mass Mutations, Dark Tidings, yeah. Hyde and Vellum were just kind of like overshadowed by Logos commons in Worlds Collide, right? If you compare the commons for Logos and Worlds Collide and Mass Mutations to the commons in this set, the difference is night and day. I don't even think Logos is not the best house in Dark Tidings, in my opinion. I think Logos is probably second. It might even be third. I think the distance between second and third is very narrow, and it kind of depends on which one you would want on average. But anyway, Hyde and Vellum are both pretty solid. I'm going to put them in role players. The fact that they aren't easy to remove is nice. My big issue with Honors Keysis is that at rare, it requires a whole lot of rares and uncommons for it to actually feel good. Like, imagine you've got a Hyde and Vellum in your Honors Keysis deck, and Hyde dies and you get to archive Hyde and Vellum, and you get to set up like a huge Logos turn later on. And it's because you have the Forgive and Forgets and Hides, so you put like 4 cards, and it's basically at that point kind of like an epic quest where you're going to take a bunch of cards out of your archives to forge something, right? You need a bunch of amber already. If you've got Science, that can add towards it, because every action that you play not only gives it minus cost, it also gives you amber, which will help you forge. But once again, it's a rare, and it feels like you need a lot of rares or uncommons to make this even viable. Hydra Cataloger is a role player. I'm hesitant to give this a standout rating because it's symmetrical. So the better your deck is, the better Hydra Cataloger is. But if your opponent's deck doesn't have enough ways to get the Tide, them paying 3 chains and being able to archive a card is kind of like a small payoff for them having to pay the change. This is actually one of the few cards that makes paying the chains to raise the Tide palatable in this set. So I think Hydra Cataloger has a very definitive role to play. Infomorph is a role player. It feels better in this set for whatever reason. I guess maybe it's because you have less total mutants in this set. So the fact that Infomorph is a blank card matters less, because at least most of your other creatures are going to have text. And the card draw icons can end up in some wacky places. We had that one deck that had like Key Frog with a card draw on it, which is really nice when you're trying to take like a big. We had a Chelonia with a card draw on it. So a lot of times it feels like you want the card draw icons outside of Logos for maximum effect. Information Exchange is a role player. It's one of the actual few common amber control in Logos, and in this card gets a lot of value for playing against shadows or even other Logos decks, like if they're using their Armadrones and whatnot. There's not a whole lot of stealing outside of shadows in this set, or at least a lot of good stealing outside of shadows. So Information Exchange, I think you're rarely going to get to hit the 2, and it's almost never worth chaining yourself to save this. If you can time it so that you wait for your opponent to take a Shadow's turn, then play this card, it's better. But just playing this to steal the 1 is typically good enough. Isotropic Core honestly feels very niche. The Logos creatures in this set are already kind of small, and you can fight into them fairly well. it really depends on what your opponent is trying to do. I think the best Dark Tidings decks don't want to fight in the first place, so giving your creatures a hazardous isn't enough to dissuade them from, you know, like fighting you. There's no incentive to fighting you, right? Like a lot of times now fighting is like a pretty good way to remove creatures, but a lot of times it's just you're gonna ignore the creatures, you're just gonna keep moving on. But hazardous one, creatures that we're gonna trade anyway, and there's not a whole lot of 1-power creatures in this set that want to fight, right? The only thing that comes to mind is the sea urchin. There's 1-power poison. So now if there were like moon cursors and slimy jarks and other creatures that are like 1-power and want to fight, this card would go up in value, but there's not a ton of them in this set. So it just doesn't feel like this card is impactful enough. It does sometimes stop your opponent from getting a bunch of free fights against you, having creatures actual take damage. And I can honestly see this card backfiring against somebody like, say, Sanctum, where they've got armor, and if your creatures were too small, you can actually damage Sanctum creatures with the hazardous one, and that would set up like an opponent's cleansing wave. So I don't know. This card is... I don't think we've played a game where it's been impactful. Knowledge is Power is very good. I hesitate to call it a standout in this set. I think it's a standout in other sets, absolutely. It's more of a role player in this set. Once again, it archives, but it's rare, right? So much of the archiving in this set is gated behind the higher rarities, so it's difficult to get a lot of it going at the same time. Backup Plan that we covered earlier is a rare. You know, you can't reliably bank on having multiple rares to combo together, right? Like you're going to be searching in DOK forever to find those decks, and you got to pray that the rest of the deck together is coherent. So Knowledge is Power is definitely a role player in this set. It's got some potential upside, but I think a lot of times it's just going to say archive a card. Library card, role player. I am hesitant to give it a standout rating in this set because of shadows, because it can get borrowed, or it can get the other shadows card that lets them use it, which I lost to famously a few weeks back, where I played a library card and Justin was playing the deck. They had like 3 copies of the using opponent's artifact Hornswoggle. Library card is a role player in this set. I think library card was a standout in mass mutations. It just made those degenerate fast mass mutation decks even better. But without the sheer number of draw icons in this set, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a deck that can really abuse library card. I don't want to rate library card too high. I think it is worse in this set. Now, there's a lot less artifact removal in this set, which is the good news, which I still think library card can potentially have a lot of upside. It's just this set, it's hard for library card to feel insane. Master the Theory is a niche card. I have played a lot with Master the Theory because it's been printed in quite a few sets, and they keep printing this card for some reason, even though Backup Plan is just a better version of this card. You want to have creatures on the table in this set, because that's like your primary way to win, because there's just a lot less Amber Pips, right? Like it's a tall ask to have no creatures. So once again, this is another archive effect at rare. So I don't know. Now, if you've got a Master the Theory deck, you're gonna obviously play it in such a way where you try to maximize your Master the Theory, but you're gonna need something to take care of the board. And board wipes are at a premium in this set. And the Logos ones aren't that great, right? If you've got no creatures, then like your Bouncing Deathquark is not going to be particularly good. Because there's only so many creatures, so many Logos creatures you could have in a hand where you have Master of the Theory, and your opponent has a lot of cards, right? And the thing about Master of the Theory is it archives cards from your hand. So that in itself means you have a limit to the number of cards that you archive, right? Best case, you're going to archive 5. In which case, what you did was you gained an amber, you put your whole hand in the archives, you drew 6, and your opponent had 5 creatures on the board, and you didn't do anything to them, right? So, Master of the Theory is just a really awkward card. You're going to need very specific circumstances for it to do anything. Mecha Buoy is a standout. Granted, I think this card is better in some decks than others. Obviously, it's Keyforge. That statement is true for everything. But Mecha Buoy will often warp the game because the amount of amber that this card generates by itself. We discovered this really early on. Justin and I want to say we've probably taken chains to raise the tide more for Mecha Buoy than any other card, with possibly the exception of Medicus Lacus. And that is only because we opened so many Saurian decks in this set. We opened a lot of Logos too, but I think Saurian was the highest number of decks that we opened had Saurians in them. Mecha Buoy is just so good. It completely warps the game if it's on the table. Mind Bullets is a role player. This almost gets a standout rating because this card, you play it for the amount that you want it to be played at. Unfortunately, this card is uncommon. We've played a decent amount of Mind Bullets. This card is better than Final Analysis by several margins. Yeah, sorry, I don't have the stream deck in here. But yeah, Mind Bullets is very, very good. And a lot of times you can use it to kill the creatures you want to be killed. And then sparing your creatures. There's a little bit of awkwardness there. Sometimes you have to play a creature that you didn't want to play. But honestly, this is a card that combines well with Old Egad. Because you play Old Egad, another card, then Mind Bullets, you do 3, you kill the Old Egad. And if Old Egad was next to cards that had 4 more power, they're at least now awarded, right? So Mind Bullets is one of the few cards that combines with Nominal Exploiter pretty well. So there's not really a whole lot like we've seen. We're what, halfway through Logos, and we've only seen like a handful of cards that can do damage to creatures. This is like one of the few action ways to do it so far. So Mind Bullets is very good. Hate to call it a standout because it's not going to win you a game by itself, but it gets the job done. Mind Over Matter is a role player. You could even argue that it's situational. Once again, it's an archive effect at rare, so cards like Knowledge is Power could combine with it, but you gotta like you gotta get a very specific deck, right? It's not a combo that you can just go looking for. I think Mind Over Matter was honestly better in Mass Mutations because you had Amber Pips. You had enhancements on your creatures, including Amber Pips, but there were other things as well. So being able to get extra value from your creatures that had Pips on them is really good. Pips are so much more rare in this set. They're there, but they're not as likely. And most of the enhancements in this set are capture icons, and you don't really want to like archive your creatures that have captured Amber on them. Sometimes you can do some combos with, like, say, Eddie. But like, playing Eddie, then playing Mind Over Matter to put your Eddie into your archives doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You need some really, like, specific things to happen in a game for Mind Over Matter to be good. But it is a board wipe of some sort. It at least can stall. And if you hit your opponent when they've got multiple houses on the table, that's when this card can do the maximum damage. That's when it's at its best. So, all right, Mobius Scroll. This card is good. It's a role player. You're happy with it. Not really much needs to be said about this card. But once again, it's rare. I'm just going to point that out. Rare, again, on archiving. Novu Archaeologist, he's not bad in this set. I've always been kind of like, why is his ability in action and not a reap effect? In Coda, it felt like it needed to be in action, but honestly, in later sets, his power level, I think reap would have been fine, but he's uncommon, and it's an archive effect. 4 powers, big enough to not want to get, to not really want to mess with. Old Egad is niche. He's just, he's really bad. You got to jump through some hoops to make him good. If all your creatures die at the same time, he's useless, and that's typically what happens with him. If he's on the table, your opponent can just go fight the creatures that are next to him, ignoring him, and then save him for last. He's not enough of a threat. He when I was thinking of the niche rating, he was the card I was thinking of. You need like a Bouncing Death Quarks or a Mind Bullets for him to feel like he's good. And even then, you're working your ass off to get maximum value. Evil Twin Old Egad, on the other hand, pretty good effect. I would say he's a role player. This effect is actually very strong, and Rage is the best it's ever been in this set because there's so many creatures that are very bad at fighting. And so this basically blanks a lot of them. I don't think we've gotten to play with him. I'd have to go actually check to see if we have, but this effect is much more welcome than a lot of the other ones that we've seen. Phase Shift, Standout. The Phase Shift decks feel so much better than decks without Phase Shift. And that's because a lot of your logo stuff really wants you to have the tide, so being able to like phase shift tide control out of another house, really good. It's common. It's like one of the few cards in this set that feel like good at common in logos. It's just it makes your deck faster. I love phase shift. I was incredulous that they reprinted it in this set because it's just such like a incredibly and powerful card. Will it ever not be a standout? Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Phase Shift enables all of like the dumbest combos in the game, right? Your deck has to be like reversal quality for Phase Shift to not be good. And the dumbest decks, the decks that are the most degenerate, the decks that are the most powerful, are going to have Phase Shift in them, right? Being able to phase shift an Imperial Forge during your logo's turn, or being able to phase shift some sort of key cheat that you're not supposed to play during your logo's turn, it is what makes phase shift insane. At its worst, phase shift gets rid of itself out of your hand. It also like lets you play another card, so it just gets out of the way. Phase Shift combines with so many of the other really powerful logos cards in this set, which I'll cover when I get to them. So Phase Shift's just it's so good in this set. It is absolutely insane. P.I. Sweven is a role player, not quite sturdy enough, and the Tide is High condition. You'll often be fine to take the 3 chains to draw 3 cards off of Sweven. I think Sweven is good. But I don't want to call Sweven a standout. Just like I wouldn't call Professor Sutterkin a standout because of the ease of removal related to them. But it is a card that almost demands an answer immediately. It's on the high end of role player. Not quite good enough to make standout, but it's a powerful effect. The Evil Twin, I think, is a slightly worse effect. However, if you were an Unfathomable deck, you probably like having a P.I. Sweven that you could utilize during Logos turns to also punish your opponent for having cards in their hand. Having the ability to like brain drain, know what's in your opponent's hand, and then having P.I. Sweven to try to like try to snipe a couple of like correct answers. is pretty good. Sweven's a solid card. You're happy to see Sweven because if your opponent doesn't answer it, then dumb stuff starts happening. Plus, it combines really well with Rooftop Laboratory. Positron Bolt at uncommon. This is like Logos's best spot removal. It's worse in this set because if your opponent knows that you have it, they can play around it. Because there's actually, with Sanctum, I would say. Positron Bolt is really bad versus Sanctum. It's really good versus other Logos. It's good against other Star Alliance and Shadows, some Untamed as well. There's a lot of like low power creatures that's easy to take out a bunch of them with a well placed Positron Bolt. So it's definitely a good card in this set. Darwin is, in my opinion, niche, not even situational. She's uncommon. And I've talked at length about the rarity of the other archive effects. So you got to get this uncommon to combine, and she doesn't combine with just any of the archiving effects. You need ones that are going to end up archiving stuff from different houses for her ability to get maximum use. There's some times where you might like archive a board wipe, and she could go get the board wipe or go get like a creature that you archived with the board wipe at the same time. That way you can keep, like, say, your board wipe archived. But it's, since she's like getting cards from your archives and putting them in your hand, it's either set up for your following turn or it's going to be a Logos card. So she could work with, like, say, Mobius Scroll, and that's not a bad combo. You use Mobius Scroll in the same turn as you reap with Darwin. And then you go get your Mobius Scroll and you replay it. That's like a cool combo, but that's an uncommon and a rare. That's not very likely to happen in your deck. Elusive at least makes her pretty difficult. The Evil Twin has got Skirmish, but they've got this similar effects, right? So she is a niche card in my opinion. Your deck has to even have one of the good archiving effects for her to be good. Reckless Experimentation, it's the same thing as we talked about with the rest of it. Rooftop Laboratory, they're right beside each other alphabetically. Definitely good solid role players in this set. Rooftop Laboratory is probably the card that's got the most upside in a vacuum. There's a decent number of scientists, so being able to play them and get use immediately from them makes Rooftop Laboratory insane. But you do have to blow up your Rooftop Laboratory if you pull off the groundbreaking discovery. And Reckless Experimentation is awesome. That's just Wild Wormhole is a great effect. Wild Wormhole is an iconic Keyforge effect, and being able to give any creature the ability to reap for a Wild Wormhole, that's good, clean fun. I don't care who you are. So Ruins of Arcanus is a role player. Don't quite want to call it a standout because your opponent can take advantage out of it. Once again, this is a card that gets worse the better your opponent is or the better their deck is. And it's probably deadly if the combination of those two factors with like specific combinations of those two factors, right? Like if you're playing against a good player who has a good deck and you play Ruins of Arcanus and they just like smirk and then play their 6 cards, you're gonna feel pretty bad. But it is a card that you can actually prepare for ahead of time. It's rare. So the archiving a card on it, I'm going to point out once again, this is another archive effect at rare. So, it's not every deck is going to be able to take full advantage of Ruins of Arcanus. I think a Star Alliance deck that has Together is probably the best deck for Ruins of Arcanus. We have 1 or 2 of these. We've definitely played it on stream and we've definitely popped it. But there have been times where it's been dicey. I've played it in situations where I didn't have a guaranteed way to crack it. I was just praying that I could get to it before Justin can. There was a game where Justin tapped it with Frigorific Rod forever. And it basically never got to do anything because the big thing is it has to be ready. So, yeah. Science is a situational card. It's not quite a role player status in this set. There's only a handful of times where it gets really good. You do need ways to. It's one of those you really want to be able to archive with it, but it does combo with a couple other things. A lot of times, science feels like a lot of those Brobnar cards from Coda that most of the time you would play, maybe get one amber from, and then you moved on about your turn, and it doesn't affect the board. So if you're not doing something insane with it, it always feels bad. The SLRS Australis. This ship is it's got a fun effect, but I think this card is going to end up situational at best. You need Logos creatures to use with it. And your deck has to, if you've got like Final Analysis in your deck, you don't really necessarily want to blow up the board. Right? Being able to triple Wild Wormhole would be really fun. But exhausting 3 Logos creatures is a pretty high demand, especially when those creatures are going to be cards like Seaborg or Sweven. It honestly feels like a lot of the creatures you have are just better off being used for their abilities. Now, if your creatures are like Garwin and Armadrone, then you might be more tempted to Wild Wormhole. It's going to really depend on your deck. I don't quite want to call this niche, but honestly, I don't know if I've activated it, right? Like, I don't know if I've activated the Australis on stream, and we had several of them. Static Charge, not quite standout status. I do think this is a very strong role player. This has combo potential with Shoulder Id, and it's just one of the better removals in the set. If you've got Anomaly Exploiter, like I mentioned before, Static Charge is insane. It makes your opponent like want to get rid of this creature. Static Charge is very good. It's like a better version of the Shadows creature that you give to your opponent that I can't think of his name right now. The 2-power skirmish creature you give to your opponent and he kills one of his neighbors. Static Charge is like a better version of that because it gives you an amber immediately. And it also doesn't give your opponent a creature that they can use every turn, right? So, Submersive Principle, very strong role player, not quite a standout. It is. It's not Slimy Jark. It's Slimy Jark is the Brobnar. Scowly Caper. There you go. Yep. So, Submersive Principle, very strong role player in this set. It doesn't win you the game by itself, but man, this card will stop you from losing a game. That's for sure. This card is better at Effervescence Principle. It doesn't give you a chain. And the fact that it is dependent on the tide means you can oftentimes manipulate how this card is played. This is another great example of a card that combos well with Bilge Warden. You could like make the tide low for yourself with Bilge Warden, so that way you just make both players lose one, right? If that was like a better effect, a lot of times both players losing half is more important. Timing this after you forge is very good. The classic Coda scenario was both players were like rushing to hit a key, and then one person forges and the other person hits like a bait and switch, while the other person's sitting at 6 amber. Submersive Principle feels the same way in this set. A lot of times you're both just trying to desperately forge your key when your opponent is going to punish you for having a lot of amber the least amount of time. You want to give your opponent a window. That's why key cheats are so powerful in this set, because of some of the scaling amber answers really, and some of the taxing too feels pretty punishing. So Tall Mage Steelheart, I'm going to give him a role player status. He's on the low end of it, but the fact that he's got +1/+1 counters is relevant for Untamed. If your deck's got Ambermancy, he's got potential. If your deck has Waste Not, making him huge is not bad thing. The Evil Twin Tall Mage is so much better. Just look at it. Just read that card. It's so insane. right? Deal damage to an enemy creature equal to the number of cards you have played this turn. Man, wow, that's so good. Tall Mage Steelheart Evil Twin is on the high role player side. Regular Tall Mage is on the low role player side. Tall Mage is one of the biggest Logos commons, and so sometimes just having like a 6-power creature in Logos to help you contest for the board, to kill problematic dinosaurs, to kill larger Sanctum creatures, that's just kind of nice. You know, Tall Mage is big enough to fight creatures like Barrister Joya that really want to shut down the rest of what you're doing in Logos. So, yeah. Archivist, I'm going to say Archivist is a niche card, doubly so in this set. Archivist was barely functional in Mass Mutations, a set that is quite a bit higher power level wise than Dark Tidings. And Archivist at rare again, and I talked at length about the rarity of the other archive cards in this set. There's not a good chance that you're going to be able to archive enough cards for Archivist to be good. And you don't have you're missing all the disc cards that help you enable Archivist, right? You can't even use the Stirring Grave to archive them from like your discard pile, right? Archivist is so bad in this set. Howling Pit is a good role player. I do caution the Howling Pit players in Sealed. It will often make your opponent just take the chains to raise the tide, because with a decent amount of change, their hand size is 7. So if they've got chains, they go down to 6, and it's just like you're playing Keyforge at that point. I think there was a deck that lost out because it was playing Howling Pit, and decks that were worse than it at holding the tide were just able to take the tide when they wanted, because it was like they were just playing a regular game of Keyforge. So Howling Pit's going to scale with how good your deck is. Now, Theory Conjecture, I hesitate to call this a standout, but this is probably the best Logos common, in my humble opinion, that isn't Phase Shift, because it is simultaneously Wild Wormhole and the Eclectic Inquiry, right? It's whichever one you need. Most of the time, the Eclectic Inquiry is going to be correct, but Theory or Conjecture makes it awkward for your opponent to brain drain you, right? Effectively, they have to have 2 brain drains if you have a Theory or Conjecture to do anything, right? Because they can either, if they brain drain a card, you can Theory Conjecture and play it. If they brain drain the Theory Conjecture and you had a card that you really wanted to play, you just go play that card and you'll draw Theory Conjecture. Or you could even archive the top card of your deck too, right? Like, you get so many options, it gets unfathomable. Theory or Conjecture is just a really good card. I want to call it a standout. It doesn't give you Amber, but a lot of times I feel like this card is going to be winning you games just based off of its pure efficiency. It's really good in multiples. Yeah, Theory Conjecture is really good. Think Twice is a standout, in my opinion. It's like Mimicry, but for your own discard pile. It's so good. It's crazy good. Not to mention, in Arkhan, it has play against Infernus. You can play your card and purge it so that your opponent's Infernus doesn't get to remove the Amber Pips for it, right? Like, Think Twice is just an incredible card, and there's so many cards in this set that Think Twice enables. Science, Theory Conjecture, Think Twice, and Science are like the holy trinity there. You can Science, you can play Theory Conjecture, gain 1, you can think, or you can like Science, you can Think Twice the Science, get like 2 Amber from that, and then Theory Conjecture, get 2 Amber. Like, Think Twice is just this ridiculous enabler. Tide Warp is a standout, in my opinion. Honestly, these 3 Logos cards right here are really juicy. This is like some of the more fun cards that we've played in the set. The decks that we had that had Time Warp in them were all insane. They were all good. Giving your opponent the tide sometimes sort of backfires, but you know that the tide's just going to come back to you. So yeah, very, very good stuff here. Universal Key Lock. I actually don't know if we've played with this card in DT, but I imagine this card's fine. It's a role player, maybe situational. it's better the more control of the flow your deck has. The more efficient your deck is, the better Universal Keylock is, right? Because you play it at the right time to force your opponent to pay to forge. If your deck is really fast, then you may not care about the Universal Keylock. Covered Vellum earlier with Hyde, so we'll skip her for now. Her effect is usually the better one. The being able to archive is usually good. Vespelon Theorist. I don't know that we played with Vespelon Theorist in this set. This was actually, I like this type of mechanic where you get like to pick the stuff off the top of your house. That should be. I like that. It is at rare. Mostly I think this card is going to be a role player. Elusive helps protect it, and it's a scientist. So maybe if you've got the Rooftop Laboratory combo, then you'll get to do some fun stuff with it. And then Zen Zinczyk is a role player. I hate to call him a standout because once again, it really depends on your deck. He's very good turn one, but you draw him in the middle of the game. A lot of times his ability is not going to be able to get to be used. So the 2 armor on Zinzi makes him hard to get rid of. So, all right, so that was Logos. That took about an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to try my best to zip through Sanctum. I think Sanctum is probably... Sanctum is a little bit better in this set than it has been in other sets. I think it's on the back of some specific cards. I think Sanctum rares overall are not that great. Like Aha, the Inconspicuous. I think this is a situational card. Hate to call it a role player, because it is a creature that can reap for damage. But 3 power creature. Logos, I'd give like an A-. You're kind of like, you really are kind of dependent on what's in your deck, right? I'm way more happy to see Logos than some of the other houses. But we have played some miserable Logos sides where they felt barely functional. So Sanctum, I would give like a B- grade. I think Sanctum might be slightly better than Unfathomable in this set. And it's because of the strength of the creatures that they have. Though Unfathomable is pretty good against Sanctum overall, I'd say, but that's just because Unfathomable is better against the houses that want to have a board, and Sanctum is definitely the house that wants to have a board. All right, so I'll try to zip through Sanctum and Saurian a little bit faster than Logos. There's certainly more to talk about on Logos than some of these others. Now, Almsmaster, I don't think we got to play with Evil Twin Almsmaster. This card certainly reads pretty well. The regular Almsmaster is good. I like this card. This is absolutely a role player. Deploy Taunt is insane. There's so many ways that you can like protect creatures with this, and then being able to capture 2 is nice. And it like spreads the amber out as well. So I'll put these at role player. Avenging Aura is niche. The definition of niche. And I'm not going to talk about it. We're going to move on. Badge Magus is a role player. It's better against like shadows and some of the weaker houses. It can set up it can absolutely set up some insane scenarios. Barrister Joya is on the verge of standout in this set. She's real hard to take off the table for the decks that want to reap and ignore your opponent's creatures. She is a problem. There's so many of those Logos creatures that they just don't want to see a Barrister Joya because it's going to take 2 or 3 of them to take her down. At which point she did her job. She stopped 3 amber. So Barrister Joya is very good. Bring Low is situational, and that's because there's only going to be a couple times a game where Bring Low is really good. And one of the major problems that Sanctum has is that it doesn't really have like the taxing in this set is kind of weak overall. It's not a good set for taxing. Mass Mutations, despite not having scaling amber control, was way better at taxing. Had so many more taxing effects, right? Bulwark is role player. The Assault 2 is very good. A lot of times it means you get to kill your opponent's creatures for free, ignoring them. Charge is going to be situational. It's certainly a powerful effect, but you need a certain critical mass of Sanctum creatures in your hand to get damage that makes it worth it. And then your opponent also has to have creatures that are susceptible to dying to charge. Now, charge does combo well with Cleansing Wave right here, but that's like one less creature that you would have in your hand if you get the Cleansing Wave. So Cleansing Wave is very good in this set, especially with cards like Infighting hanging around. I hesitate to call Cleansing Wave a standout, because it oftentimes is too situational. But this is a very good candidate to be archived, and it's also a very good like think twice target. So being able to like think Cleansing Wave during a Logos turn is just crazy. Doorstep is very good. It's a role player, not quite a standout, but man, it certainly missed having, absolutely missed having Scaling Amber Control and Mass Mutations. Dry the River, I'm going to put at role player status. I think we only had one of these, so I don't have a ton of experience with it, but man, it certainly does change the game, right? So yeah, Cleansing Wave has had some exceptional plays. Yeah, I think Justin has probably gotten to take better advantage of Cleansing Wave than I have at this point. So Justin might rate Cleansing Wave higher, but you don't have the damage icons that you did in, say, Mass Mutations, right? Epic Quest is situational. You gotta have a certain number of knights for your deck to be good. And unfortunately, a lot of the Sanctum creatures in this set are monks, so they don't count. You can't archive them. Yeah, this is actually probably the worst set for Epic Quest, in my opinion, because like your Logos combining, your Logos archiving, like I said, was locked behind rarity gated. So you can't. It's hard to set up an Epic Quest with your Logos. Forgive and Forget is better, because you could archive like a Sanctum creature and a Sanctum action, right? So yeah, Epic Quest and Worlds Collide, Omega lol. First or Last is an exceptional card. I'm going to put it role player though, because it does require you to engineer a board state. This card is actually probably better in Arkhan. Just being able to imagine like purging 2 eddies with this card. So yeah, this card's pretty good. Gatekeeper is going to go into the role player status. And the reason I'd give him role player over say like something like Bring Glow is because it's a body. So it can fight even if you're not using it for its effect there. So Sanctum has 3 uncommons that can deal with large amounts of amber. Even if they end up just being a miasma and they just delay your opponent for 1 turn, that's still better than the options that you had in some other sets, right? So Salvador is a role player. He's got a body that fights pretty well, and being able to capture randomly can be pretty decent. Gorm of Om is situational. There's a lot less artifacts in this set that need to go than say Mass Mutations. There's nothing on the same level as autoencoder, right? There's nothing that you like really want to get rid of. So a lot of the rare artifacts in this set are goofy. The boats, like I don't feel like I've never seen a boat where I've been like, man, if I don't get rid of this boat, I'm going to lose the game, right? So it's always better to have artifact removal and not need it than to need it and not have it, though. Grand Melee is a situational card. Most of the time, this is going to kill a handful of creatures. And if you already have a table, you can certainly make better use out of Grand Melee. But the more we've played with this set, the worse Grand Melee has gotten. Great Augur is a role player. It's not quite strong enough to take over a game by itself, but it certainly makes your fighting, which you often want to do with Sanctum, a lot better. The Evil Twin, I don't think we played with. Yeah, Haven't played with Evil Twin. I think I would rather have the regular one than the Evil Twin one. The Evil Twin one's not bad. It really, like, if you're Saurian, it could be better. Hadros Wall is a role player. It makes your opponent make play mistakes because they're not counting stuff correctly. Yeah. Hadros Wall is really good. Not much else to say about it. It's better if you've got like Waste Knots, right? Hammergram is a role player. I'm always happy to see Hammergram. There's always something to kill, or at least stun, right? The creatures it doesn't outright kill, it at least stuns. And the fact that it deals damage and stuns is nice with, say, Cleansing Wave. Harmonic Ritual. I think we had like 1 or 2 decks. This card was situational. You need a specific board for this card to be very good, to give you a lot of amber. Fortunately, at Rare, you don't have to worry about like trying to make this work a lot of times. There are going to be decks that are better at using it than others. Heal Harm. Not quite a standout, but very good. I really like this card. I'm going to put it in role player status. The ability to ready and fight with the Sanctum creature immediately makes the Badge Magus plays that much better. The ability for Sanctum to kind of come out of your hand and start dealing with stuff immediately is pretty high in the set, which is why I rate them higher than I would have in other sets. And kind of why I like them a little bit more than Unfathomable overall. Because they're just very good at dealing stuff. So you wish Harmonic Ritual had a cap and a lower rarity. Yeah, I could see that, right? Like if it was effectively Strange Ordination, or if you could have, like, do 3, right? Like, so let's say you could do it twice, and it was like at uncommon. Yeah, that card could be really good. I absolutely see that. Holdfast is a role player. Not quite standout status, but man, he gets a lot of work done from what we've seen. Another card that combos really well with Badge Magus, another card that combos really well with Healer Harm. 6 power, no armor, means he combos well with Cleansing Wave, because he's going to take damage, and the creature next to him will have taken damage. Honor or Glory is a role player. One of the it's solid, but it depends really what your opponent is doing. A lot of times if the board gets too big, it's because 3 damage is not enough damage to actually kill them. But the modality of this card gives you a lot of options. Another crazy card with Cleansing Wave, though, right? Lady Lorena is a role player. I don't think she's as good in this set as she was in, say, Mass Mutations. We had that one Mass Mutations deck that would play Lady Lorena, and then decks would just like scratch their head as like how they would get around her 3 armor. The quality of creature that she's protecting this set is probably slightly lower than Mass Mutations. Yeah, the super taunt is nice. So Larry the Lake is a role player, not quite standout, but definitely a role player. The bonus armor can be pretty good. The Evil Twin one is not great in my opinion. It's not awful, but it's still probably put in the role player status. This one's higher. I would rate that one higher than this one. Larry the Lake combos with a lot of stuff. Light Everlasting, role player, because it only gets Sanctum. If it could get it from any house, the card would be insane. But since it only gets Sanctum, the major problem is that a lot of the Sanctum creatures in the set do not have play effects. So a lot of times you're using this to play a Sanctum creature that is already dead, or that had already died. So that means it either got outfought or removaled somehow. But there's a lot of static effects that are pretty good to put back into play. Larry the Lake is one. Barrister Joya is another one. Lightsmith Clariel, I am going to call it a role player, but honestly, it's probably closer to situational. It's got a decent body. Oh yeah, Light Everlasting is good with Sanctum. With Epic Quest. Yeah, that's a good enabler. It's uncommon, so I always hate having to try to like combo uncommon and rares, right? Because it's going to be a lot, like a percentage fewer decks, several percentage point fewer decks are going to have that combo in them. But yeah, it's absolutely an enabler for that. The evil twin Lightsmith Clariel is crazy, because if the opponent's creature does not have armor, it dies, right? So the regular one, I'm not sure why you want to swap its power and toughness. There's not... It's so weird, right? It's a weird effect at rare. The evil twin one feels like it was designed first, and then they had to like make a good version of it, right? So it's a big enough body that I'm not going to call this situational, but this card is baffling. Whereas the evil twin is insane. Still probably a role player. It may not win the game by itself to reach that really standout status, but man, that's an effect right there. And it won't kill everything. Golgotha is really good. I would have given Golgotha standout status in Mass Mutations. Golgotha, we've played with him a couple times in this set. Still pretty good. Still swinging for the fences. Combining them with like a bulwark or even like a plasma nozzle or something like that when Golgotha starts going to town. Very good card at clearing parts of the board. Gizzleheart's a role player. Definitely better in this set because you have fewer total mutants. So you're less likely to get a deck where he actually will heal your creatures, but just fewer total mutants overall, right? So your opponent's going to have less mutants. So he's got a lot of potential upside, but fortunately, there's a couple like battlefield shifting cards in the set, so you might be able to move him to the center if he wasn't there. So that probably makes him like a slightly better leader than in some of the other sets because of cards like Shifting Battlefield. Marshall Ewer, I'm going to say, is a standout. You're always happy to have him. He's almost always got a target that he can fight to raise the tide. This card is incredible. It's just good. He becomes a priority target over other stuff, especially if you've got tide-related mechanics. Mighty Lance is a role player. The ability to do 3 damage twice, very good. The Sanctum has some of the best removal in the set. Now, a lot of it is gated at the higher rarities, but still, Sanctum has some of the best removal in the set. Numquid is a standout. Worst case, you play Numquid and kill a creature. Best case, Numquid is absolutely leveling the playing field. So very good card. Orb of Wonder is a role player, not quite standout because it's kind of slow. But Orb of Wonder is pretty good. It's definitely one of the better artifacts in the set. It goes and gets the card that you need when you need it. If the decks were better in this set, then I would say Orb of Wonder would be better. It's not like Mass Mutations where you can go get a busted card that has lots of enhancement pips on it. The cards just overall in this set are so much worse. So Orb of Wonder kind of lacks a little bit. Orpheol, role player. Orpheon, role player. These cards have played pretty well. Justin and I have opened quite a few of these. Once again, they're monks, so they don't count towards epic quests. Numquid the Fair, not a monk. Not a knight, so it doesn't get to. You don't get to put Numquid into your archives with epic quests, which would be insane, right? Because you would just you play Numquid, wipe the board, play a couple other knights, then archive all of them, so that your opponent can't even really feel like they could develop a board because Numquid would just come back out and kill them all again. But unfortunately, Numquid, not a knight, so you don't get to epic quest. Is a good Light Everlasting target, though. One of the very few play effects in Sanctum. Orpheon and Orpheol have both done stuff for us, but I think Orpheol is better because typically you want the tide higher, and the capture on Orpheon is less powerful than, say, just gaining 2. Radiant Truth, pretty good. I'd put this as role player. You could argue situational for this, but the situation in which it gets its effect is very, very good. And I think more often than not, you're going to hit stun at least one creature with this. So I think Radiant Truth is good enough to be called role player in this set. Redhead Registry is situational, but man, it just totally houses decks that want to steal Amber. I straight up lost a game to Redhead Registry. I was worried about playing Shoulder Id, and in case Justin dropped Redhead Registry, but he hadn't played it yet, I don't think. And so I played my Shoulder Id, and of course the next turn he drops the Redhead Registry, and then he just kept my Shoulder Id alive and would just run into it to stop me from forging at specific times in the game. Card in the situations this card is dominating, it is winning the crap out of that game. So round table, role player / situational. I'm gonna say this is situational. A lot of the knights in this set, the extra power doesn't really go that far, and the taunt is useful. You really gotta have creatures that you want to like protect for the taunt to be good. Sanctum Guardian, we may have only had one of these in this set. Role player, big body, can be moved around the battlefield. You know, it's more battlefield moving effects. Sargasso's role player, we've spent a lot of time playing around our own Sargassos so that the opponent can't use them, right? That's why I would hesitate to call Sargasso a standout. Because the effect is good. The effect is powerful, but it's symmetric. So you gotta find ways to get your own Sargasso killed to stop giving your opponent free ways to stop your keys. So Evil Twin one, I don't know that we played with one of these. I think we had far fewer Evil Twin Sanctum decks than the other houses. Because I don't think we played with one of these. Because that one's just upside, right? After a player raises the tide, Sargasso captures 2. Right? That's just pure upside. That's very good. So, Seraphic Armor, situational. I mean, it's going to get you Amber and whatnot, but the heal has almost never mattered. And the +1 armor might be good on like Urian. That's all I can think of. SGS Illuminator, situational. Maybe even niche. A lot of times, I don't know why I would want to stun my opponent's creatures. Because a lot of times you can kill them, and it does exalt. Yeah, I don't know. It's a wacky card. There might be a Saurian deck that wants to stun and exalt your own creatures. I don't know. It's just not. It's not as good as just fighting stuff off the table, right? Shifting battlefield, role player. Captures one and you can move some stuff. This card's done some good things for us. It's not like broken, but there's some times where it does some good things. Shoulder armor, same thing. Role player. This card combos. We had that one night of just pure Voltroning, and shoulder armor was definitely in one of those Voltron decks, right? Sir Bever, I want to call him situational. I'm gonna stick with role player though. I think the Evil Twin Sir Bever is better because of the poison, right? But the big thing about this one power there is it means the creatures fighting into Sir Bever aren't typically going to die. So while he's a goofy card, he can kind of get in the way. I don't think he's powerful enough. 1 power poison, 5 armor is kind of like a collector worm at that point, right? Collector worm arguably better, but Sir Bever, he's got some play right there at least, right? Staunch Knight, role player, 6 power, 2 armor as long as you're playing positionally with it. Pretty good. Fights into most things in the set to kill and survives through all of them, right? Strange Ordination is a role player. It's on the verge of standout because it does feel like a lot of the Sanctum decks that we play that are doing really well in the tournament right now have Strange Ordinations in them, but I think you need a certain critical mass of tide grabbing effects for Strange Ordination to be good enough. So on the high side of role player, same kind of deal as Eureka, where if you're like in control of the game, Strange Ordination does a good job of closing it out for you. Whereas if you're behind, Strange Ordination feels awful. If you don't have the Tide, taking the Tide to play this card, it feels like you need it to get back in the game, but doesn't affect the board. So I'm going to put Strange Ordination in the role player category, despite being potentially very powerful. Taxing Journey is a good role player, not quite Standout, because you do need 3 of the same house. Can do some pretty powerful things. Corpulent Collector, I think we had the deck that had Hadros Wall and Corpulent Collector, so you can actually capture up to 8 amber, and keep the Corpulent Collector alive. There's a lot of interesting things with the Corpulent Collector. It's going to get better with some of your decks, but definitely probably in the role player status. Vault Keeper, role player status. A lot of decks it may be blank against, but against the decks that it's good against, it's going to absolutely hose them. Trial by Water, I don't know if the decks that we played that had this card advanced or not, but it's certainly a very potentially powerful effect because it can just blank your opponent's Tide effects for a turn, which is nice. So it's a situational card. There are times where you've got the Tide and you don't want it to be reset, but if you're struggling to keep up with the Tide, that is a good time to reset it, though. Urian is a role player. We have seen him do some exceptional things, but we've also seen him come down and just die. So Evil Twin and him are going to be very similar. I think I would give the edge to the regular one because the regular one combos with the regular Larry the Lake, whereas this Urian will never have Larry, because Larry will always be the Evil Twin version, which does not buff his own armor. So you're going to need stuff like Shoulder Armor or Light of the Archons to get full effect out of the Evil Twin Urian. But this is a very potentially large amber loss, so that's pretty useful. So Sanctum, I would put Sanctum probably 4th in the set overall. So Logos is in like the 2nd/3rd space. If I was having to rank the houses, I think I would go Saurian. No, that's bottom. Saurian is at the bottom. Star Alliance is first. Then Untamed Logos. And then whichever one of those that isn't there. Probably Sanctum, then Shadows, then Unfathomable, then Saurian. And that is a very loose rating. I'd have to honestly sit down and brain it out more than that. But that's like a rough rating, just to give you an idea. The thing is, I don't think Sanctum pairs that well with some of the other houses, but there's a lot of raw power in Sanctum. And honestly, it pairs best with, like, say, Star Alliance, right? Because Urian loves to get Voltroned. And Star Alliance can use some help in the beef department in this set, which Sanctum provides plenty of. Okay, so I am going to power through Saurian. We may go a little bit later than we normally would, but I don't think it'll be like too far compared. We managed to do that in under an hour, so hopefully I can keep up the same pace for Saurian. Altruist Rostrum is a role player. It's a very important role player in Saurian because there's not enough like ways to dump amber off your own creatures, and Altruist Rostrum provides a very important release valve. I would give Saurians in this set a C-D+, based off of the sheer number of Saurians that we've played, which has been a lot because Saurian was our most open house in Dark Tidings. Ankylo Formation is a niche card. I think we have played this one time to give a creature skirmish. I do not think we have ever played this card to exalt a creature to give multiple creature skirmish. So, very niche card. Bestiary Urso and the Evil Twin are both very strong role players. Bestiary Urso is probably worse than the Evil Twin one, because play, fight, stun a creature, that's pretty good. That's a very strong effect. But Bestiary Urso is like one of the very few unstun effects in the game, so he actually combos based off of the other contents of your house, and 5 power, 1 armor. That is a nice combination, right? Brachynalia, I don't think we actually played with this card. I don't think we opened one. But I would probably put this in the situational category, depending on the contents of the rest of your house. So, and it depends on what you're playing against. If you're playing against Logos, Star Alliance, Untamed, the Brachynalia is free, right? They're never going to capture enough amber. But if you're playing against Saurian or Sanctum, yeah, Imperial Road exists, and Brachiodatus too, right? So Bestiary Urso combos with Brachiodatus. Because you can Imperial Road in Bestiary Urso and he just unstuns himself, right? Like, that's awesome. That's an awesome effect. But then again, it's combining an uncommon and a rare. So, yeah. Brachynalia is probably a fine card. You're just going to have to control who you play it against. I wouldn't want to play that card against Sanctum. There's so much capturing in Sanctum. Whereas if you have a Sanctum Saurian deck, this card could be very potentially good. Brachiodatus is a super confusing card. I'm going to put this in the niche category, because it's 9 power, which is good, but it's like stunning your own creatures, and it's moving stuff to the common supply instead of just like giving it to you. I don't know. It's such a confusing card. It is interesting to see like a reversal where a big Saurian creature is stunning your other creatures, but I don't know. It feels bad to play it. I don't know if any of our Brachiodatus decks advanced, to give you an idea. Barrier Riches is a standout in Saurian. You could claim that this is just a role player, but Barrier Riches, I think if there's going to be a busted Saurian deck in this set, it is because of Barrier Riches and literally not other cards in the house. So, yeah, Barrier Riches is very good. Carpe Venum is good too. This card does some good work. Since your Philo is a nice role player, and the Evil Twin one, it kind of depends on the rest of your deck. But I think these are they serve their purpose. They're in the bruiser category. Sila and Charybdis, I don't think we played with them in this set. I don't think we opened any of them, but we opened a couple of them in Mass Mutations. I'd put them in the role player category. It's the type of creature your opponent kind of wants to deal with before they get to do other stuff. So it really depends on the strength of their removal. They do ask your opponent a couple of like key questions, and they're not easy to fight off the table. So they're fine. They have a nice role to play, and they fit that pretty well. City State Interest is very good. I would call it role player. Yeah. Oh yeah. Charybdis, the before fight lose one. You'll just empty your opponent's amber pool as they try to deal with these big dumb dinosaurs, right? That's like the one thing Saurian has going for it in this set, is that the big dumb dinosaurs are just so much more of a pain in the ass to fight than they were in other sets. They're less protected than ever. There's like barely any wards in this house now. But yeah, they're just a pain to have to fight through. City State Interest is very good. It depends on how many Saurians you have. City State Bury the Riches certainly looks like a combo. They're both uncommons, so that's not going to be in every Saurian deck. I don't even know if we have a Saurian deck that has these together. I don't think we do. But that would be something I would value very highly, especially if you had Logos, to have like a way to capture, or sorry, to archive one of these until you drew the other one. Consul Primus role player. He's on the smaller side for the Saurians, and can get fought off the table. But he combined with the rostrum, or how you're going to have to like clean up your Saurians, because you don't have Praefectus Ludo at common anymore. Cornus Octavia is a nice role player. Crasosaurus is a niche card, possibly even situational. Niche because you don't have the busted stuff, or all the busted stuff with Crasosaurus in this set is at rare. I think Whirlpool is the greatest example of a funny Crasosaurus card. It's you need specific cards for this card to be very good. and the situation in which it would be played in a game is going to be rare, where it actually does anything, right? Crushing Charge is a strong role player. Decadence is a role player as well. Crushing Charge, there's a lot of annoying creatures that it's really nice to blow up with Crushing Charge. And unfortunately, this does not touch a lot of the Saurians. The Saurians that it does kill at common are like Console Primus and Lapisaurus, maybe. Otherwise, a lot of the cards that this kill are going to be at higher rarities. Decadence, this card is extremely versatile, so that's what makes it so strong. You're almost always getting value from this card in one way or another. Dino You Didn't, despite being a funny name, well, regardless, it's got a funny name, and I would say it's solid. It is a card that certainly gets some work done, depending on the contents of the rest of your deck. I would put it at the role player status on the low end. It certainly gets better in decks where you've got the manipulation, right? You got the Decadence or Console Primus stuff to move Amber around, assuming your opponent isn't capturing Amber, right? Diplomacy is situational. This card has almost always ever been gain an Amber pip, and that's it. Sometimes it dissuades your opponent from fighting, but and sometimes you want to fight with creatures to exalt them, but I don't see this card being particularly very good. It's maybe even niche, honestly. Eclectic Ambrosius is situational, probably niche. He's got a 4-power body, so I hate to rag on this poor guy. I think we had one game where we almost got to use this creature, but it died. I think I got 1 to 2 counters, or I may have had one at 3, and then Justin killed it. I don't know. It just seems so hard to pull off. It's like a huge, big effect, but you can't ward them. Not really in this set. So, I didn't even know there was an Evil Twin version of this creature. Put ignorance counter on any creature as long as creatures. That's pretty good. I consider that a role player status. But yeah, it's because he's rare, right? Yeah. So we never seen this Evil Twin, so haven't had a chance to play with him. I would assume he's kind of solid. I assume is his effect persistent, as long as that creature has an ignorance counter, his text box is considered play. So that's persistent, right? Even after he dies, because that's not like a separate line of text, right? It's not a static effect on him. I'm going to assume that is persistent, in which case that's pretty good. So, Enlist Numeri is a situational card, can be good. But this was in a deck the other night, and it was only okay. Not like a huge card. Faust, role player, not quite standout because you don't have ways to dump Amber. But I do think Faust is a very key starting card in this set. You really need ways to tax your opponent. But Faust does feel much worse in this set because I think you have fewer total capture icons than you did in previous sets, or in Mass Mutation. And there's not like he's very hard to protect in this set for whatever reason. He's almost always a priority target. Typically what happens with Faust is that he taxes the opponent for too much, then he dies, and the opponent just forges for 6 anyway. So anytime I think you can get the tax off, he's good. Gladiodontus is a role player. I don't think he really ever gets to... we had a game where he went totally sick house on me. I think Justin killed like 6 creatures with his idiot, but you know, a lot of times I don't know if he'll ever get unstunned. Good of the Many is situational. Really difficult to get too many creatures with this. Grimlockus Ducks. I'll put him at the role player. He's huge. The Exalt twice is a little bit more of a burden than it had been in previous sets, but the 11 power 2 armor means he will fight for days if you need him to. I do think he is. You've got fewer ways to dump that Amber in one go. So I think exalting twice is actually a drawback, unlike when this card was printed originally. The Histostis Raptors, I am going to put them at situational. We opened 3 Histostis Raptor decks, and I don't think any of those decks advanced, if I'm being honest. So that means these guys are not good, right? It's not like Plague Rats where you get like some sort of immediate effect from them. These cards just don't feel particularly good to play, and they eat up a whole lot of deck space. And so while they've got a decent sized body, the effect that you get from them isn't that good. They just don't combo particularly well. Hedonistic Intent I'll put at role player status. This card, I consider this card pretty good in Mass Mutations. I think it's still fine in this set. You've got some control over when you play this, right? So you can always make sure that your opponent has more flank creatures than you do. If they have creatures at all and you don't, then that's just straight up exalting your opponent's creatures. This is one of your Amber kind of like generation techniques, because you can combine this with some other removal and take stuff off the table. Tabletop Royale preview exclusive High Priest Torvis right here. He's a role player. There's some decent actions you could pull back. Certainly City State or Bury the Riches are like the dream. It's a little bit difficult to pull off the dream with him, but who's Eddie barking at? Who could Eddie be barking at? Can you hear him? He's calmed down now. All right, anyway. So, High Priest Torvis can do some potentially nasty things, but I think it takes like a little bit of work for it to get there. Humble is pretty good. In the set, a lot of times the exhausting of creatures, what you're playing this for. This is another way to actually dump Amber off of your own cards. Imperial Forge is good. I will call this situational. I think it's harder to pull this card off than it is in say Worlds Collide, but I do think this can combo potentially pretty crazy things. Imperial Road is good, definitely a role player. It's a way to get you some efficiency that you normally wouldn't have, and so being able to get efficiency out of Saurian is always nice, just because it's a slower house and you've got the tendency to get clunked up. The Indomitus, I think this one actually has some of the higher upside, some of the other ships, but once again, I'm going to put this in the situational. If you're faced with like a bunch of elusive creatures that are not really worth fighting, you could tap like 3 Saurians and annihilate a table, right? So I think this has some definite upside, but I'm just generally down on the ships. I think the ships are just a big whiff. Design wise, flavor wise, they make some sense, but design wise, they just don't really practically work. Lapisaurus, I want to call him a role player. He's definitely on the lower end. He's almost situational. He's nice enough to get in the way. He's not very easy to take off the table. That 4/2 stat line means your opponent has to contribute something relatively large to kill him. It means just like straight up 5-power creatures don't kill him. And exalting the opponent's creatures is kind of a hassle too. So usually he just kind of gets in the way. He's very good at protecting some of the smaller creatures in this set, and he's good at just getting in the way. Lapisaurus, Evil Twin, on the other hand, looks pretty good. Taunt is worth a lot in this set. Yeah. It is. There's a lot of taunt in this set that is just very annoying to fight through, and he's definitely on that list, right? This Lapisaurus right here, I don't know that we got to play with it, but I would imagine it's not bad. So it's not an awful effect. It's kind of like a Francis style. You're getting some amber for some fighting. It's not big enough to be like a super threat. he does look metal as hell though. Look at that. Look at the black plating instead of like the gold plating. Magistra Vita is a very solid role player in this set. This gives you some burst potential in Saurian, which is sorely missing. And it's a good way to use like reap effects outside of the respective house. You know, this combos well with Logos if you got PI Sweven, stuff like that. Just very good at generating some value for you. And a lot of times if you're set up, the Exalt is not that big of a deal. You can like kind of shunt it off. Magistra Vita, Evil Twin. I don't think we had one of these. Exalted friendly non-Saurian creature to fight with it. I would say that's probably worse or better depending on which houses are in your set. Still probably a role player. I mean, typically fighting is a worse effect overall than reaping. But I could see it being good, like in the right circumstances. Medicus Lacus, I will put in the standout category. And that is because Medicus Lacus warps games that he's in. Obviously better in some decks than others. But he's certainly pile of play effects in Saurian Evil Twins. I could see that. I just don't think we opened that many Saurian Evil Twins, so I don't have a lot of experience with them, right? It is nice to have like you know, a play fight effect, right? And I would say typically exalting to fight is worse because there's a higher risk that your creature is just going to die and then your opponent can get the Exalted Amber, right? You're immediately putting them in the line of fire. But yeah. So anyway, back to Medicus Lacus. I think Medicus Lacus presents a problem to the opponent. Your opponent can always respond to it because they can always take the chains. Yeah, we've played a lot of games where Medicus Lacus has just died or has never been effective. But I think any time in which he worked, he would have won the game on the spot immediately. So I'm going to put Medicus Lacus in the standout category. It's one of the very few Saurian cards in this set that I would put in the standout category overall. Anyway. Ostracize, very strong role player. Purge is just insane. You do have to lose the Amber, which does kind of hurt. There have been times where I haven't been able to play this. I've had to do some other stuff. Take another turn that I didn't want to, so that I would have Amber so that I can ostracize. But extremely powerful effect. The targeted removal is very, very good in the set. Paraguardian, I think, is really the only Saurian card that wards in this set. I may be mistaken, but I don't, and it's at uncommon. Saurian, at least in the other sets, had ways to ward at common, but Paraguardian at uncommon, man, oof, that's a chore. He's a role player. He does some work, but yeah, it's you're working your ass off to get the wards in this set. Physicus Felix. I think we did play with an Evil Twin Physicus Felix. And he's a good, solid role player. You know, being able to exalt your enemy creatures to get more amber, very good. So yeah, I would say both of these are solid. I think Physicus Felix is actually, the Evil Twin one is one of the few cards that actually cares if the tide is low for you, outside of like Orpheon, right? So definitely an interesting effect. Primus Ungis is a role player. The bonus power in this set goes a long way, but you don't have all of the emergency release valves that you did in other sets. So Amber that's on Primus Ungis is certainly more at risk than in Worlds Collide, where you could just put like a Scutum on him, or have a Praefectus Ludo in play, and you didn't care, right? Like he would just have a pile of Amber, and you were like completely safe from reprisal. And it's, like I said, it's very hard to ward in this set. So Reach Advantage is a strong role player in this set. Absolutely pivotal Saurian card. If Saurian did not have Reach Advantage, Saurian would feel even worse in this set. So Saurium is a very strong role player. This is like one of the few Saurian artifacts that we've seen that warps the game around it. And this is better against Logos, Star Alliance, and Shadows than it is, say, against Sanctum. Because a lot of times your creatures are going to be bigger than theirs, and you can reap freely, and they can't, and they're just kind of like locked into having to fight. It's like having a Barrister Joya to some degree. So sorry about that. It's fine. It's a role player. It's rare. I still don't know why this card is rare. It could be uncommon. But I mean, it's I'm always hesitant to give my opponent an amber, but there are times where you want to give the opponent an amber so that you can forge, and destroy creatures is a nice effect. So you know, a lot of times the worst case scenario is your opponent was going to reap with that creature. So you know, this card's fine. Not really much to say about it. It's kind of it's not really that flashy. Covered Scylla. Quintina is a role player almost on the verge of situational. A lot of times this card really backfires because you don't have the big amber dumps that you had in previous sets, but you can potentially set up some big berry riches and whatnot. Quintina does also work with Siren Horn, which I think is a strong role player for Saurians. Spoils a Battle as a role player. Swallow Whole, also another good role player. Both of these actions right here, one lets you control some amber, one lets you control some creatures. It does require that you have the Tide high, but man, it just straight up purges another creature. So we've seen Swallow Whole do good things in the tournament. And Spoils a Battle don't quite have the same amount of amber control that you did in the previous set. So this card is slightly worse, but man, this card can certainly lead to blowouts. I still don't know why this and City State are together in this set. But judging off of Saurian's performance overall, it doesn't seem to be that broken. But I guarantee you there's some degenerate Saurian deck out there that's going to use both of those cards and Imperial Forge. Pterodactyl's a role player. Oftentimes doesn't really get unstunned, but certainly presents a threat if it ever gets to that point. Tertiate is a solid role player. There's a lot of Saurian stuff that's just like good solid stuff. And there's a lot of like not great Saurian stuff. So what ends up happening is your Saurian sites feel potentially powerful, but they're like hampered by like a handful of bad cards, and so you're just kind of like, man, if these weren't here, if I just had more copies of my good stuff, the Saurian deck would be insane. But like Colosseum is a situational card, maybe even niche. It's bad versus Unfathomable because you won't ever get to fight. Your opponent's creatures aren't going to die in fights. Your guys are just going to be tapped forever. I do think First Scroll is a very powerful card. It's a I'm going to call it situational, but it might even be a role player. I think there's some decks that can take advantage of it. I think this deck, First Scroll particularly punishes some decks more than others. Trojan Sauropod is a niche card. We've talked a lot about Trojan Sauropod, but this is the definition of a niche card. It is a card that is going to backfire more often than not. But if you've got the right cards, you might be able to do some wacky stuff with it. So, Undeck Nathas is a role player. He's almost on the verge of being situational, but he is a big creature, and he's got the advantage of not coming into play stunned, unlike a lot of the other huge Saurian cards. So, it's a lot like Wallop the Titanic, in my opinion, where it's just sometimes you got a big guy that your opponent can fight for free, but it's going to take quite a few fights for that value to be presented. So Venator Altum is a nice solid role player. The one trait that I'll give Saurian in this set is they've got some big creatures at common. They have probably the largest per capita creatures in the set. It's just that's not a huge advantage this time around, unfortunately, because fighting is really difficult to pull off versus Unfathomable. Wipe clear. Destroying upgrades is certainly interesting. This isn't like the broken set for upgrades. Yeah, destroying upgrades. It's nice to have that as an option, and the 1 damage to each creature is almost negligible, but it combos well if you've got a cleansing wave in your deck. So, okay. So there we go. I powered through Saurians in under 30 minutes. And that's because I think Saurians is the weakest house in the set. Not to say that there aren't going to be broken Saurian houses, but or Saurian decks out there. But Saurian certainly feels like one of the worst houses to play. And I think Saurian matches up so poorly versus Unfathomable. It is just not fun to play that matchup. You play some dumb idiot dinosaurs, and your opponent just like taps a Velucanth and taps your whole board. So, if it wasn't for like a handful of cards in Saurian that are like barely holding them together, then Saurian would feel really, really badly in this set. I don't know what it is about, because it feels like the difference between Saurian in this set and Mass Mutations is not that big, right? It doesn't feel like the world of difference. It just, for some reason, psychologically, it feels like it should be playing about the same. It just doesn't even come close. I think it's because of Unfathomable. I think if you were playing the Saurian and other sets, and honestly, it's probably the lack of wards too, right? Because you don't have auto defense matrix or Imperium, so that you can play these Saurians and back them up with some wards, so that way they don't immediately get taken out. It's just, yeah, it doesn't feel great. So okay, that is where I am gonna stop for tonight. I'll come back tomorrow where I will tackle Shadows, Star Alliance, Unfathomable, and Untamed. We'll go through, give them a rundown, use the same kind of rating system, and definitely talk about the collection of the house, how the house feels as a whole. Talk about some combos along the way. Certainly enjoyed chatting with everybody tonight. I hope that you didn't mind the departure from the gameplay. I feel like we had some very solid discussion around some cards. Yeah. So appreciate everybody hanging out tonight. I think I am legally obligated to say that the music that I played before the stream was music from League of Legends. So I was supposed to attribute them somewhere on there. But I'll play you out with another one of the songs from their DMCA free pile. They have like a bunch of stuff that you can play. I was able to access that stuff on my computer instead of because I don't think this is set up for the dual audio that, like, say our stream computer or setup in the other room is. So anyway, I am gonna play you out. I'll be back tomorrow night with the second half, and I will look forward to seeing everybody then. So good night.